The question of honesty. Have you ever felt exhausted from pretending just to be accepted? If you're tired of learning English but still feeling stuck, if you've spoken and seen confusion in someone's eyes, if you've dated someone and secretly wondered whether they liked the real you or just the polished version, then this story is for you. Today, I want to share something personal about dating in America, about climate differences, culture, lifestyle, and how learning English through my own love story taught me one powerful word: honesty. And maybe, while you practice listening and speaking with me slowly, you'll find your own answer to this question. Are you loved for being yourself? When I first arrived in the United States, I thought improving my English was just about vocabulary and grammar. I told myself, I need to improve my English. I need better pronunciation. I need confidence. It sounded simple. But English is not just a language. It's identity. It's the bridge between your inner world and everyone else. There was a time I almost gave up. I listened to podcasts and understood maybe 50%. I watched the news and felt mentally tired after 10 minutes. When people spoke quickly, especially in busy American cities, my brain froze. You might know this feeling. You stand in a room full of native speakers. Everyone laughs at jokes you barely catch. You smile politely. You nod. But inside, you feel invisible. Psychologists call this language anxiety. When you are afraid of making mistakes, your brain activates the amygdala, the fear center. That fear response reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for thinking clearly and forming sentences. In simple words, the more afraid you are of speaking wrong, the harder it becomes to speak right. Your brain is not betraying you. It's trying to protect you from embarrassment. At the same time, I was curious about dating in America. I noticed something different compared to what I was used to. Americans, especially in modern dating culture, value direct communication. They ask clear questions. They expect honest answers. There is less guessing, less silence, more transparency. But I didn't feel ready. I told myself I would start dating after my English became good enough. After my accent softened. After I stopped translating in my head. After I felt confident. In other words, after I became perfect. Life didn't wait for that. My first real date in America happened on a cold autumn afternoon. The air was crisp. Leaves were golden. The sky looked calm, but inside, I was nervous. I had prepared answers in advance. If he asked, "What do you do?" I had a safe, structured response. If he asked, "Where are you from?" I had a short, impressive explanation. I rehearsed everything. I wanted to sound intelligent, smooth, interesting. Then he asked something unexpected. What makes you happy? That question was not in my script. For a few seconds, my brain went blank. No prepared sentence. No perfect grammar pattern. Just silence. I could feel the anxiety rising. But instead of searching for a sophisticated answer, I spoke slowly. I feel happy when I don't have to pretend. My sentence was simple. Maybe imperfect. My pronunciation was not flawless. But it was real. And something changed in that moment. He didn't laugh. He didn't correct me. He leaned in and said, "That's honest." That word stayed with me. honest. I realized that learning English is not only about accuracy. It's about courage. Courage to speak before you feel ready. Courage to express feelings without hiding behind perfect grammar. Courage to accept that mistakes are part of communication. In the United States, especially in dating culture, authenticity matters. People value emotional clarity. They may not expect perfect English, but they do appreciate sincerity. When I tried to copy the way others spoke, I felt tense. When I spoke in my own rhythm, slowly, clearly, thoughtfully, I felt free. That is why learning English through real stories works so well. When you practice with a story, you are not memorizing isolated words. You are connecting language to emotion. For example, instead of saying, "I was sad," you might say, "I felt invisible in that room." The second sentence creates an image. It carries emotion. Your brain remembers it more easily. Research on narrative learning shows that stories activate multiple areas of the brain at the same time. Language centers, sensory areas, emotional circuits. That means when you listen to a real English story, you are not just practicing listening. You are building deeper memory connections. You are training your brain naturally. I did not become fluent overnight after that date. My English did not suddenly become perfect. But my mindset shifted. Instead of asking, "How can I sound perfect?" I started asking, "How can I sound honest?" And strangely, my English improved faster after that. When you stop trying to impress and start trying to connect, your tone softens. Your body relaxes. Your brain processes language more smoothly. Confidence does not come from perfection. It comes from alignment, when your words match your true thoughts. Maybe right now, you feel discouraged. Maybe you think your English is not good enough for love, for career, for life in America. But consider this, people are not searching for a flawless recording. They are searching for a real human being. Every time you speak, even slowly, even with mistakes, you are practicing more than pronunciation. You are practicing authenticity. And in dating, in friendship, in marriage, authenticity is magnetic. So maybe the real question is not, "Is my English good enough?" Maybe the real question is, "Am I brave enough to be myself?" My first days in America. Imagine stepping off a plane and feeling like the air itself speaks a different language. When I first arrived in the United States, the difference was not only in English. It was in the temperature, the light, the rhythm of daily life. Even the sky felt bigger. I landed during late winter in the Northeast. The wind was sharp. The cold did not politely touch your skin. It attacked it. I had never experienced that kind of dry, biting air before. Back home, winter was softer. In America, winter felt honest. It did not pretend to be gentle. That was my first cultural lesson. Climate shapes personality. In colder states, I noticed people moved quickly. They walked fast, talked fast, made decisions fast. Time felt valuable. Conversations were direct. When someone said, "Let's grab coffee sometime," they usually meant it. They would take out their phone and schedule it. In my culture, that same sentence could simply be politeness. No real plan. Already, I could see how misunderstanding might happen. Not because of vocabulary, but because of different social rules. And this affected my English learning more than I expected. You might think language learning is about books and apps. But environment changes everything. When I heard English in daily life, in grocery stores, on public transportation, in small talk at the gym, it sounded different from classroom English. It was faster, shorter, full of idioms. Someone would say, "I'm good," and it didn't always mean they were good. It meant no, thank you. Or I'm okay. Or I don't need help. At first, my brain felt overwhelmed. There is a concept in psychology called cognitive load. When you are in a new environment, your brain processes more information than usual. New sounds, new social cues, new weather patterns, new transportation systems. That overload makes language processing harder. It is not that your English is bad. It is that your brain is busy surviving. I remember walking into my first American supermarket. The store was huge. Bright lights. Endless choices. A stranger smiled at me and said, "How's it going?" I froze for a second. Were they asking about my life? My health? My mood? I answered too honestly. I said, "Actually, I'm a little stressed because everything is new." The cashier looked surprised. Later, I learned that "how's it going?" is often just a friendly greeting. The expected answer is simple. Good, how about you? Small moments like that made me self-conscious. I started questioning every sentence. Was I speaking too much? Too little? Too directly? Not directly enough? Then came regional differences. I traveled to the West Coast a few months later. The climate was warmer. The air softer. The lifestyle slower. People smiled longer. Conversations felt more relaxed. Someone said, "No worries," almost every hour. That phrase became one of my favorites. No worries. It felt like permission to breathe. In the South, I experienced something else, hospitality. Strangers called me Mom. They asked about my day and waited for the answer. The tone of English changed with geography. The accent shifted. The rhythm softened. America is not one culture. It is many cultures living under one flag. Understanding this changed how I approached learning English. Instead of chasing one perfect American accent, I focused on clarity. Instead of memorizing advanced vocabulary, I practiced simple, natural phrases that people actually used in daily life. For example, instead of saying, "I am extremely grateful for your assistance," I learned to say, "I really appreciate your help." Short, clear, natural. Climate also influenced dating culture. In colder cities, dates were often planned indoors. Coffee shops, museums, quiet restaurants. Conversations were focused. People asked direct questions about career goals, values, future plans. In warmer states, dates could mean hiking, beach walks, outdoor festivals. The energy felt lighter. I realized something important. If I misunderstood the culture, I might misunderstand the person. For example, when someone said, "I need space," it did not always mean rejection. In American culture, personal independence is highly valued. People protect their time and emotional boundaries. At first, I interpreted this as distance. Later, I understood it as respect. Living in America forced me to adapt not only linguistically but emotionally. There is research showing that immersion accelerates language acquisition because the brain creates stronger neural pathways when language is connected to real-life necessity. When you must use English to rent an apartment, open a bank account, or explain your feelings on a date, your motivation becomes practical. You are not studying for a test. You are building a life. Some days were exhausting. I would return home mentally drained after hours of listening carefully to every word around me. But slowly, my ears adjusted. What once sounded like noise became patterns. What once felt intimidating became familiar. If you are learning English from outside the United States, you might imagine America as one single cultural image. But the truth is more complex and more beautiful. Climate changes behavior. Geography shapes communication. Policies affect daily routines. Diversity influences social expectations. And in the middle of all that, you are trying to find your voice. My first days in America were uncomfortable. Cold air. Fast speech. Cultural misunderstandings. But discomfort was not my enemy. It was my teacher. Because when the environment challenges you, your brain grows. And sometimes, the freezing wind of a new country is exactly what wakes you up. When English made me ashamed. Let me tell you about the day I wanted to disappear. It happened in a small cafe during what was supposed to be a simple, relaxed conversation. I had been in the United States for a few months. I had survived winter. I had learned how to answer "how's it going?" correctly. I thought I was improving. I felt slightly more confident. Then I misunderstood a joke. He said something playful about breaking the ice, and I took it literally. I started explaining how cold weather really does make social situations awkward. He smiled politely. I realized too late that he was teasing. My face became hot. My mind went blank. I laughed too loudly to cover my embarrassment. In that moment, my English didn't just feel weak. I felt weak. Have you ever felt that? That sharp wave of shame after saying something wrong in a second language? It's not just about grammar. It feels personal. Like your intelligence is being measured. Like your personality is trapped behind limited vocabulary. Psychologists explain this through something called self-discrepancy theory. You have an actual self, who you truly are, and an ideal self, who you want to be. When you speak your native language, those two versions are close together. But in a second language, there's often a gap. You feel smarter inside than you sound outside. That gap creates frustration. For me, that gap became heavy. After a few awkward conversations, I started speaking less. I simplified my answers too much. When someone asked, "What do you think about that?" I would reply, "It's interesting." Safe. Short. Emotionally empty. I was protecting myself from mistakes. But something strange happens when you protect yourself too much. You disappear. In dating, this became even more painful. How can someone fall in love with you if they only hear the safe version? If your personality is reduced to "it's good, that's nice, I agree." One evening, after another conversation where I felt small, I went home and replayed every sentence in my head. I criticized my pronunciation. I criticized my word choice. I criticized my pauses. It was exhausting. There is strong research showing that language learners often experience heightened self-monitoring. Your brain constantly checks for errors before you speak. This increases anxiety and slows fluency. It's like trying to dance while watching your own feet the entire time. Of course you will trip. The irony is that mistakes are necessary for fluency. Studies in second language acquisition show that error-based learning strengthens neural pathways. When you make a mistake and then correct it, your brain builds a stronger memory trace than if you had never struggled. But emotionally, mistakes still hurt. I remember one specific misunderstanding that almost made me stop dating completely. He asked me, "Are you seeing anyone else?" In American dating culture, this question often means, "Are we exclusive?" But I interpreted it literally. I thought he was asking if I physically see other people during the week, friends, co-workers. I answered casually, "Yes, of course, I see many people." The look on his face changed. Silence filled the table. When I realized what he meant, I felt embarrassed again. I quickly explained. He laughed kindly. But inside, I felt tired of being confused. That night, I asked myself a dangerous question: maybe I'm not ready for this country. But here's what I slowly began to understand. Embarrassment is not proof that you are incapable. It is proof that you are stretching beyond your comfort zone. Neuroscience shows that learning happens most effectively in a state of moderate challenge. Not too easy. Not overwhelming. Just slightly uncomfortable. That discomfort signals growth. Instead of quitting, I changed my strategy. First, I started practicing storytelling out loud when I was alone. Simple stories. What happened today? What I felt. Why it mattered. I recorded myself. I listened back without judging. Not to criticize, but to observe patterns. Second, I focused on phrases, not perfection. Instead of trying to create complex sentences, I mastered flexible structures like, "I felt confused when." "I didn't understand because." "Can you explain what you mean by?" These sentences gave me power. They allowed me to admit confusion without shame. In American culture, asking for clarification is normal. It signals engagement, not weakness. Third, I reminded myself of something important. Vulnerability builds connection. When I started saying, "Sorry, English is my second language. Can you say that again?" People became more patient. The tension in my body decreased. My speech became smoother. Confidence did not come from pretending to understand. It came from being honest about not understanding. Slowly, dating became less about performing and more about connecting. One evening, during a walk in the city, I told him, "Sometimes I feel like my personality is bigger than my English." He smiled and replied, "I can see your personality clearly." That sentence healed something inside me. Maybe your English is not perfect. Maybe you still mix up prepositions. Maybe you misunderstand jokes. But your worth is not measured by fluency speed. Shame tries to convince you to stay silent. Growth asks you to speak anyway. And that day in the cafe, the day I wanted to disappear, became the day I realized something powerful. Mistakes don't make you less lovable. Silence does. My first American date.
Let me set the scene.
It was early spring. The cold winter had finally started to loosen its grip, and the air felt softer than when I first arrived in the United States. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop downtown. Very American, very casual.
No dramatic romance. No grand gestures.
Just coffee. That was my first cultural surprise about dating in America. In many cultures, a date feels formal. There are expectations. Sometimes even unspoken rules about who pays, how long it lasts, what it means. But in modern American dating culture in 2026, things often begin simply. Coffee. A walk. A short meeting to see how it goes. Low pressure. High honesty. Still, my heart was racing. I remember standing outside the cafe, repeating sentences in my head. Nice to finally meet you. How was your day? I'm glad we could do this. I practiced the rhythm. I practiced smiling naturally. I told myself, speak clearly.
Don't talk too fast.
Don't freeze. When he arrived, he didn't hug me immediately. He smiled and asked, "Are you comfortable with a hug?" That question shocked me. In America, especially in recent years, consent culture has become very visible. People often ask before physical contact. It's considered respectful. That small moment taught me something about boundaries in American relationships. Direct communication is not rude here. It's healthy. I said yes, and we hugged briefly. Simple. Respectful. We ordered coffee separately. Another small cultural detail. Splitting the bill is common, especially on first dates. There was no awkward discussion. He just said, "I've got mine." I said, "I've got mine too."
Independent.
Equal. As we sat down, he asked, "So, what are you looking for?" In some cultures, that question would feel too serious for a first meeting. But in American dating culture, clarity is often appreciated. People don't always want to waste time. They ask early. Inside, I panicked. What was I looking for? Friendship? Marriage? Experience? Practice speaking English? My brain tried to build a perfect answer. But I remembered something from my previous lesson. Honesty matters more than perfection. So I spoke slowly.
I am looking for something real.
I don't want to pretend. There it was again. Pretend. He nodded. Same. That moment felt small, but it was powerful. Two imperfect people sitting in a noisy coffee shop, trying to communicate honestly in a world that often encourages performance. Dating in America also taught me something about vulnerability. He shared stories about his childhood in the Midwest. Cold winters, strong family traditions, Sunday dinners. I shared my story of moving across the world, learning English, feeling invisible sometimes. There were pauses in our conversation. But instead of feeling awkward, the pauses felt natural. I realized something important. Silence in English does not mean failure. It means thinking. Research in communication psychology shows that comfortable silence is a sign of trust. When you don't feel pressure to fill every gap with words, your nervous system relaxes. Your brain processes language more smoothly. And your English improves naturally because you are not rushing. At one point, I mispronounced a word, focus. I said it too softly, and he misunderstood it as something else. I corrected myself. We laughed. The world did not end. That was new for me. In the past, mistakes felt like disasters. But during this date, I noticed something. He cared more about what I meant than how I said it. Meaning over mechanics. This is a powerful mindset shift for English learners.
When you focus only on perfect grammar, you sound tense.
When you focus on connection, your speech becomes more natural. Fluency grows from communication, not from fear. We also talked about cultural differences in relationships. In America, individual happiness is often emphasized. People are encouraged to maintain independence even in serious relationships. Personal space is respected. Career goals are important for both partners. That was different from what I was used to. I asked questions. I said, "Can you explain what you mean by that?" And instead of judging me, he appreciated the curiosity. Asking for clarification is not weakness. It is engagement. By the end of the date, nothing dramatic had happened.
No movie-style kiss.
No emotional confession. But something more important happened. I felt seen. Not because my English was perfect. Not because I impressed him with advanced vocabulary. But because I spoke honestly. As we stood outside the cafe again, the air slightly warmer than when I first arrived months ago, he said, "I like how real you are." That sentence stayed with me longer than any compliment about appearance or intelligence. Dating in America did not just improve my speaking skills. It forced me to practice authenticity in real time. No script. No subtitles. Just me. And maybe that's the hidden secret of learning English through real life. You don't wait until you're fluent to live. You live, and fluency follows. Because in the end, the most attractive accent is honesty. Climate shapes personality and love. If you think weather is just background scenery, think again. Living in the United States taught me that climate does not only change what you wear. It changes how you speak, how you date, how you argue, and even how you love. And when you are learning English through real life, especially through dating in America, understanding climate differences becomes surprisingly important. Let me explain. In the Northeast, where winters are long and intense, I noticed people value efficiency. Conversations are direct. Schedules are tight. When someone says, "I'll text you," they usually do. There is less small talk and more intention. At first, I interpreted this as emotional distance. But over time, I realized it was cultural rhythm. Cold weather often forces people indoors. Social interactions are planned. Dates happen inside warm cafes, museums, apartments. Emotional conversations feel focused.
Strukturet.
Practical. Then I spent time in California. The sun changes everything.
In warmer climates, life moves outside.
People walk more slowly. They linger. They say, "Let's see how it goes," instead of making firm plans. Dating feels exploratory. Less pressure. More flow. I heard phrases like "just vibes" and "no rush." That relaxed tone influenced how people communicated expectations in relationships. Climate psychology research suggests that environmental temperature can subtly influence social behavior. Warmer environments are associated with increased social openness and casual interaction. Colder climates may encourage planning and structure. Of course, these are general trends, not rules, but when you are learning English in real dating situations, these patterns help you interpret tone. Because language is not just words. It's context. For example, when someone in New York says, "Let's get straight to the point," it's normal. In another region, that same phrase might sound abrupt. If you misunderstand the cultural background, you may misinterpret personality as rudeness, or friendliness as lack of seriousness. I learned this the hard way. During one trip to a southern state, I went on a date where conversation felt dramatically different. He called me ma'am. He opened doors. He spoke slowly. He asked about my family early in the conversation. In some modern urban areas, asking about family too soon can feel intrusive. But in the South, family culture is deeply valued. It was not pressure. It was tradition. This experience changed how I practiced English listening skills. Instead of focusing only on vocabulary, I started listening for tone, rhythm, and regional expressions. American English is not one uniform sound. Accents vary. Idioms change. Even the emotional weight of certain phrases shifts across states. For example, "bless your heart" in some Southern contexts can mean genuine sympathy or polite criticism. Without cultural awareness, you might misunderstand the emotional message entirely. Learning English through real dating experiences forced me to pay attention not just to grammar, but to emotional temperature. Another difference influenced relationships directly: independence. In many parts of the United States, individual identity is emphasized strongly. Career goals, personal growth, therapy culture, emotional boundaries. These are common conversation topics in 2026 American dating culture. When someone says, "I need space," it often means they are protecting their mental health, not rejecting you. In colder cities, that phrase sounded practical. In warmer, more relaxed communities, it sounded softer. But the meaning was similar: autonomy matters. Understanding this reduced my anxiety. At first, when someone didn't text immediately, I thought I had done something wrong. Later, I realized Americans often separate personal time from relationship time more clearly than I expected. Once I understood that cultural norm, I stopped overanalyzing every pause. And interestingly, my English improved at the same time. Why? Because anxiety decreases comprehension. When you are emotionally calm, your brain processes language more efficiently. Cortisol levels drop. Working memory improves. You listen better. You respond more naturally. So climate influenced culture. Culture influenced dating behavior. Dating behavior influenced my emotional state. And my emotional state influenced my English fluency. Everything was connected. One evening, walking along the beach in a warm coastal city, I told him, "I think the weather makes people softer here." He laughed and said, "Maybe. Or maybe you're just more relaxed." He was right. When I felt safe, my sentences flowed more smoothly. When I felt judged, I became robotic. That realization was powerful. If you are learning English right now, remember this: environment matters. The emotional climate around you matters as much as the physical one. If you feel tense, rushed, or criticized, your brain tightens. If you feel safe, curious, and accepted, your language expands. Dating in America did not only teach me new vocabulary. It taught me to read the invisible signals shaped by geography, weather, and social norms. And once I stopped fighting the differences, once I observed instead of judging, I became more adaptable. Fluency is not about sounding American. It's about understanding America. And sometimes, the temperature outside explains more than the words inside.
The lesson of radical honesty.
There is a moment in every relationship when pretending becomes too heavy to carry. For me, that moment did not arrive with drama. It arrived quietly, during an ordinary conversation on an ordinary evening. We were sitting in his apartment, city lights glowing through the window. We had been dating for a few months. My English had improved. I could follow jokes more easily. I could express opinions without freezing. On the outside, everything looked stable. Inside, I was still editing myself. I softened certain opinions. I avoided complex emotional topics because I didn't have the perfect vocabulary. I sometimes agreed too quickly because disagreement required more language. It felt safer to nod than to explain. But safety is not the same as honesty. That night, he asked me a simple question. Do you ever feel like you're holding back? I paused. In American dating culture, especially in 2026, emotional transparency is increasingly valued. Therapy language has entered everyday conversations. Words like boundaries, triggers, attachment styles, they are normal topics. Avoiding emotional depth can actually signal distance. I realized he wasn't criticizing my English. He was asking about my authenticity. So I answered slowly. Yes. Sometimes I don't say everything I think because I'm afraid my English isn't strong enough. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Just thoughtful. Then he said something that changed everything. I care more about what you feel than how perfectly you say it. That sentence unlocked something in me. Radical honesty does not mean being harsh. It means removing performance. In psychology, vulnerability is defined as the willingness to show uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Research by Dr. Brené Brown and others has shown that vulnerability strengthens intimacy. When you admit imperfection, you create trust. But vulnerability in a second language feels twice as risky. You are not only exposing your emotions. You are exposing your grammar. Still, I decided to try something new. Instead of protecting myself with simple phrases, I experimented with fuller expression. I practiced sentences like, I feel insecure when. I'm afraid that. I need reassurance about. These were not advanced academic sentences. They were emotionally honest ones. And something surprising happened. My fluency improved faster. There is a scientific explanation for this. Emotional engagement increases memory consolidation. When language is attached to strong feelings, your brain stores it more deeply. So when I practiced emotional honesty in English, I was strengthening both my relationship and my neural pathways. One evening, we had our first real disagreement. In my culture, conflict is often indirect. You soften criticism. You imply dissatisfaction instead of stating it clearly. But in many American relationships, direct communication is encouraged. Avoidance can be interpreted as dishonesty. He said, "If something bothers you, I'd rather know." My instinct was to say, "It's fine." That universal phrase. Safe. Empty. But I stopped. "It's not fine," I said carefully. "I felt hurt when you cancelled our plan without explaining." My heart was racing. I worried my tone sounded wrong. I worried my sentence structure was clumsy. He listened. He didn't attack. He didn't mock my English. He apologized. He explained. We adjusted. That conversation taught me a powerful lesson about dating in America. Clarity prevents resentment. And clarity requires courage. Language learners often fear mistakes more than silence. But silence creates emotional distance. In relationships, distance grows quietly. It does not announce itself. By choosing honesty, even imperfect honesty, I felt stronger. There is also neuroscience behind this shift. When you suppress thoughts and emotions, your brain expends cognitive energy to maintain that suppression. That mental effort reduces working memory capacity, the same system you need for language production. In simple words, hiding feelings makes speaking harder. When I stopped hiding, my sentences flowed more naturally. Radical honesty also changed how I viewed myself. I stopped measuring my worth by accent. I started measuring it by alignment. Were my words matching my internal truth? If yes, I felt calm. If no, I felt tension. Dating in America became less about impressing someone with fluent English and more about building emotional transparency. One night, during a walk under city lights, I asked him, "Are you ever afraid to be fully yourself?" He smiled. Everyone is. That's why honesty is attractive. That word again. Attractive. Not perfect. Honest. In modern American relationship culture, authenticity is increasingly valued over image. Social media creates performance. Real connection requires stripping it away. Learning English through this process felt transformative. Instead of memorizing random vocabulary lists, I learned emotionally meaningful phrases. Instead of fearing mistakes, I accepted them as part of authentic communication. Instead of performing fluency, I practiced presence. And here's what I discovered. Honesty simplifies language. When you tell the truth, your sentences become clearer, shorter, more powerful. You don't need complex grammar to say, "I care about you." You don't need advanced vocabulary to say, "I am scared." You don't need a perfect accent to say, "This matters to me." Radical honesty reduced my anxiety. Reduced anxiety improved my fluency. Improved fluency strengthened connection. Connection encouraged more honesty. It became a positive cycle. Dating in America did not just teach me how to navigate cultural differences. It taught me that the most fluent version of myself is the honest one. Because love does not require perfection. It requires truth. And truth, even spoken slowly, is powerful. When I wanted to quit, there is a quiet kind of exhaustion that no one sees. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. It's the kind that shows up after months of trying to understand fast American English, trying to adapt to dating culture, trying to balance independence and intimacy, trying to be brave in a language that still feels borrowed. And one night, I reached that point. We had just had a small misunderstanding. Nothing serious. A scheduling issue. In American culture, calendars matter. Plans are often set in advance. If something changes, communication is expected quickly. He sent a short message, "Let's reschedule." Simple. Neutral. But my tired brain translated it emotionally. I read it as rejection. When you are already insecure about your English, your mind becomes creative in negative ways. Psychologists call this cognitive distortion, when your brain fills gaps with fear instead of facts. Because I was mentally exhausted from constant language processing, my emotional resilience was lower. So I thought, maybe this is too hard. Maybe dating in America is too complicated. Maybe living in the United States in a second language is too much. That thought was heavy. I started imagining an easier path. Speaking only my native language. Dating someone from my own cultural background. Not having to explain cultural differences. Not worrying about tone, subtext, regional slang, or whether I misunderstood a phrase. Quitting sounded peaceful. But quitting also felt like shrinking. There is research in motivation psychology that explains this moment. When effort feels high and reward feels uncertain, the brain searches for escape. It prefers short-term relief over long-term growth. That's why many language learners stop right before a breakthrough. I didn't know I was close to a breakthrough. I only knew I was tired. That evening, I told him honestly, sometimes I feel like everything is harder for me here. He asked, harder how? And for the first time, instead of simplifying my answer, I explained fully. It's harder to argue. Harder to joke. Harder to express deep feelings. I have to think about every sentence. I am tired of thinking. He listened quietly. Then he said something that surprised me. You know, I don't see the struggle the way you do. I just see you trying. That sentence stopped me. Because when you are inside the struggle, you magnify it. You replay every small mistake. But from the outside, people often see effort, not imperfection. There is also something important about bilingual identity. Studies show that people who operate in a second language may feel like slightly different versions of themselves. Emotional intensity can shift. Humor can change. Confidence can fluctuate. That doesn't mean your identity is broken. It means it's expanding. But expansion is uncomfortable. I remember sitting on my bed later that night, thinking about why I started this journey in the first place. I didn't move to America for comfort. I moved for growth. For opportunity. For love. For experience. And growth rarely feels smooth. In dating especially, cultural differences amplify emotional stress. In the United States, individual boundaries are emphasized. People may say, I need time to think, or I want to focus on my career right now. In some cultures, that sounds like emotional withdrawal. In American dating culture, it can mean self-respect. Without cultural understanding, every phrase can feel threatening. I realized I wasn't just tired of English. I was tired of uncertainty. But here is the turning point. Instead of withdrawing, I tried something new. I told him directly, when plans change suddenly, I feel anxious because I'm still adjusting to how things work here.
He nodded. That makes sense.
I'll try to communicate more clearly.
That was it. No drama. No breakup. No rejection.
Just clarity. And clarity dissolved half of my fear. There's a concept in neuroscience called exposure adaptation. The more you face a challenging stimulus, like speaking English in emotional conversations, the less reactive your nervous system becomes over time. Avoidance strengthens fear. Exposure reduces it. If I had quit dating, I would have strengthened my anxiety. By staying, by communicating, I slowly reduced it. But the temptation to quit was real. If you are learning English right now, you might be in that same phase. The excitement is gone. The novelty is gone.
The mistakes feel repetitive.
Progress feels slow. This is the plateau stage. Language acquisition research shows that learners often experience visible improvement at the beginning. Then comes a plateau where growth is less obvious, but deeper neural restructuring is happening. It feels like stagnation. It is actually consolidation. In relationships, something similar happens. The first months feel exciting. Then reality appears. Differences appear. Effort becomes necessary. That night, I decided not to quit. Not because it was easy, but because I realized something powerful. Difficulty does not mean incompatibility. Sometimes it means transformation. Dating in America was not just testing my English. It was testing my resilience, my patience, my willingness to grow through discomfort.
And the moment I almost walked away?
That was the moment I became stronger. Because quitting would have protected my ego. Staying protected my future. The science of confidence. Confidence is not a personality trait. It's a nervous system response. I didn't understand that at first. I thought confident people were simply different. More extroverted, more fluent, more naturally comfortable in American dating culture. I assumed they didn't rehearse sentences in their heads before speaking. I assumed they didn't replay conversations at midnight. I was wrong. Confidence, especially when learning English in the United States, is biological before it is emotional. Let me explain. After the night I almost quit, I became curious instead of defeated. Why did my heart race before difficult conversations? Why did my hands feel cold before expressing disagreement? Why did my English suddenly disappear when emotions became intense? The answer lives in your nervous system. When you feel socially threatened, for example, during an argument in a second language, your body activates the fight or flight response. Your heart rate increases. Your breathing becomes shallow. Blood flow shifts away from higher reasoning centers toward survival mechanisms. That means your ability to retrieve vocabulary decreases. It's not that you forgot English. Your body temporarily prioritized survival over fluency. Understanding this changed everything. Instead of judging myself, I started regulating myself. Before emotional conversations, I practiced slow breathing.
4 seconds in. 6 seconds out.
This activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the calming branch. Research shows that extended exhalation signals safety to the brain. When your body feels safe, your language improves automatically.
It sounds simple.
It works. I also changed how I practiced speaking. Instead of only studying grammar exercises, I practiced emotional scenarios out loud. I would say,
I feel misunderstood. I need clarity.
I'm nervous about this conversation. At first, it felt artificial. But repetition builds neural familiarity. The brain strengthens pathways it uses repeatedly. So when those real moments appeared in dating, the phrases felt accessible. In American dating culture in 2026, emotional articulation is common. People talk openly about attachment styles, therapy experiences, personal growth. If you cannot express emotions clearly, misunderstandings multiply. Confidence, then, becomes less about sounding impressive and more about staying regulated. One evening, during a deeper conversation about long-term expectations, I noticed something new. My heart did not race. My breathing stayed steady. I spoke slowly, but without panic. I'm afraid of losing myself in relationships, I said. That sentence would have terrified me months earlier. But now, it felt grounded. He responded calmly. The conversation stayed balanced. No explosión. No rejection. Just two people discussing fears. That was the moment I understood. Confidence is built through exposure plus regulation. Psychologists call this self-efficacy, the belief that you can handle challenges. Self-efficacy grows when you face manageable difficulties and survive them. Each successful emotional conversation strengthened my belief that I could navigate English and intimacy at the same time. There is also something powerful about identity. When you move to the United States, especially from a different cultural background, you begin negotiating two identities. Your native language self and your English-speaking self. At first, my English self felt smaller, less expressive, less witty. But as I practiced emotional vocabulary intentionally, the gap narrowed. Neuroscience suggests that language and identity are closely linked in the brain. The words you use influence how you experience emotions. When I learned to say, I feel vulnerable, instead of just I'm sad, I accessed a more precise emotional state. Precision increases control. And control increases confidence. Dating in America became my laboratory. Each disagreement was data. Each honest confession was practice. Each misunderstanding was feedback, not failure. I also learned something surprising. Americans often respect effort. When I said, I'm still learning, but this is important to me, the response was usually patient. Directness combined with humility creates trust. Pretending to understand creates distance. Confidence is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to speak while your heart is still beating fast. One afternoon, sitting in a park, I told him, I used to think I needed perfect English to deserve love here. He looked at me and said, you deserve love because you're real. The English is just the packaging. That sentence made me laugh. Because it's true. Fluency is a tool. Authenticity is the foundation. When your nervous system is calm, your English flows more easily. When you trust that mistakes won't destroy connection, you risk more honesty. When you risk more honesty, intimacy deepens. And here's the beautiful cycle. Regulation builds confidence. Confidence builds clarity. Clarity builds connection. Connection reduces fear. Learning English through real emotional experiences is not just language training. It is resilience training. So if your voice shakes sometimes, that's okay. If you pause to find words, that's okay. Your brain is adapting. Your identity is expanding. Confidence is not something you wait for. It's something you build, breath by breath, sentence by sentence, conversation by conversation. And once you understand the science behind it, fear loses half its power. Because your nervous system isn't your enemy. It's just waiting for you to teach it that you are safe. When love becomes a language lesson. If you're learning English in the United States in 2026, especially through dating, here's the truth no textbook will tell you. Romantic relationships will expose every weakness in your language skills, and every strength you didn't know you had. Because love is not small talk. Love is nuance. Love is timing. Love is emotional precision. And if you're building confidence while navigating American dating culture, this phase is where everything either clicks or cracks. At first, I thought improving my English meant expanding vocabulary and reducing grammar mistakes.
I downloaded apps.
I watched interviews. I memorized phrases like, "I appreciate your perspective. That makes sense. I understand what you're saying." Useful? Yes. Enough? Not even close. The real breakthrough came when I realized relationships demand something deeper, emotional fluency. There's a difference between saying "I'm fine" and saying "I feel dismissed." There's a difference between "it's okay" and "it hurt me." In American dating culture, especially in 2026 where therapy language is mainstream and conversations about boundaries are normalized, emotional clarity is valued. People talk about attachment styles. They discuss triggers. They analyze patterns. If you're silent in those moments, you're not mysterious.
You disconnected.
I learned this the hard way. One evening he asked me, "What do you need from me right now?"
It sounded simple.
But my mind went blank. Need? Right now? In English? In my culture, we don't always articulate needs directly. We show them indirectly. But American communication often favors explicit expression.
If you want reassurance, you say it. If you need space, you name it.
And I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't struggling with English. I was struggling with vulnerability in English.
That is a different challenge.
Language is a tool. Vulnerability is courage. So I started practicing a new skill, not vocabulary lists, but emotional ownership. Instead of saying, "You made me upset," I practiced saying, "I felt hurt when that happened." Instead of silence, I practiced pauses followed by honesty.
Give me a second.
I'm trying to find the words. That sentence alone changed my dating experience. Because it signaled effort. It showed care. It bought me time. And it kept the conversation alive instead of shutting it down. Here's what no one explains about learning English through relationships. You will feel temporarily less intelligent. In your native language, you are witty, quick, layered. But in English, especially during emotional intensity, you may feel slower. That gap can hurt your ego. But here's the shift. Fluency is speed. Connection is depth. You don't need to be fast. You need to be real. One of the biggest mindset changes for me was accepting imperfection publicly. Early on, I would rehearse sentences before serious conversations. I would script possible arguments. I would predict questions. But real intimacy doesn't follow scripts. So I allowed myself to speak imperfectly. Sometimes I used the wrong preposition. Sometimes I paused mid-sentence. And something surprising happened. He leaned in more when I struggled. Because effort is attractive. In 2026, authenticity consistently outperforms polish in American dating spaces. Social media may reward perfection, but real relationships reward transparency. There's also a psychological layer most language learners overlook. When you date in a second language, you are constantly translating internally. That cognitive load increases emotional fatigue. You may feel drained after conversations that native speakers find normal. That doesn't mean you're weak. It means your brain is working overtime. Understanding that helped me stop blaming myself. I began setting boundaries around energy. After intense conversations, I allowed myself quiet time. I journaled in my native language to process emotions fully. Then I translated insights into English phrases I could use later. For example, native thought, "I'm scared of being misunderstood." English phrase, "Sometimes I worry that I'm not expressing myself clearly." See the difference? It's softer. But it's honest. Dating became less about proving fluency and more about building bridges.
Another lesson. Humor translates slower than feelings.
Sarcasm. Cultural references. Wordplay. These take time. But emotions? They're universal. If you say, "I'm nervous because I care," people understand. And caring well is more important than joking well. The turning point in this stage of my journey came during a disagreement. Instead of shutting down, I said, "I'm not sure I'm explaining this perfectly, but this matters to me." He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush me. He listened. And I realized something powerful. When you prioritize clarity over pride, people respond differently. Confidence in American dating doesn't come from flawless speech. It comes from emotional consistency. If you show up, speak honestly, and regulate yourself when anxious, you build trust.
Trust builds attraction.
Attraction builds intimacy. Intimacy builds fluency. Yes, fluency. Because the safer you feel, the more naturally your language flows. The brain retrieves vocabulary more easily when it's not defending itself. Safety unlocks expression. So if you're learning English through dating in the United States right now, here's the reframe.
You're not behind.
You're not awkward. You're adapting in real time. Every deep conversation is advanced practice. Every vulnerable moment strengthens both your communication skills and your emotional intelligence. Love will test your grammar, but it will also strengthen your voice. And one day, without noticing the exact moment it happened, you'll respond to a difficult question calmly. You'll express a need clearly. You'll disagree without panic. And you'll realize you're not translating anymore. You're living in the language. That's when English stops being a subject and becomes part of who you are. Becoming fluent in who you are. If you've followed this journey from part 1 until now, You probably expected this story to end with perfect English, a stable relationship, and a clean, cinematic conclusion. But real growth doesn't end like a movie. It evolves. And if you're learning English in the United States in 2026, especially through American dating culture, the final transformation isn't about pronunciation, grammar, or even romance. It's about identity. At the beginning of this journey, my goal was simple: speak better English so I could date confidently in America. But somewhere between awkward first dates, vulnerable conversations, misunderstandings, apologies, and breakthroughs, the goal shifted. I stopped asking, how can I sound more American? And started asking, how can I sound more like myself in English? That question changed everything. Because here's the truth most language learners don't realize. Fluency is not imitation. It's integration. When you first arrive in the US, especially if you're entering the dating scene, you may feel pressure to adapt quickly. You study slang.
You analyze texting patterns.
You watch how people express affection, boundaries, independence. You try to decode American dating culture like it's an exam. But culture is not a test you pass. It's a space you participate in. At some point, I noticed I was performing. I would adjust my personality slightly, soften certain opinions, avoid complex topics because I didn't trust my English under pressure. It felt strategic, but it also felt exhausting. And exhaustion is usually a signal that you're not aligned. The breakthrough didn't happen during a romantic moment. It happened during a disagreement. He said, "You don't have to say things the way I would say them." That sentence hit me harder than any compliment ever had. Because I realized I was unconsciously measuring my English against a native standard, not a personal one. There is a subtle psychological trap when learning a second language in intimate settings. You may equate linguistic dominance with emotional power. If someone speaks faster, jokes easier, argues more fluidly, it can feel like they have control. But control in relationships is not about vocabulary size. It's about self-possession. The moment I stopped trying to win conversations linguistically and started focusing on clarity, something shifted internally. I began embracing pauses instead of fearing them. Silence is not weakness. It's processing. And in 2026, American dating culture is increasingly aware of emotional pacing. Therapy language, attachment theory, and personal growth conversations are common.
People value introspection.
They respect thoughtful responses.
You don't need rapid-fire charisma.
You need grounded presence. There was a night when he asked me, "Do you feel at home here?" He didn't mean physically. He meant emotionally.
Kulturelli.
Internally. Months earlier, I would have given a safe answer. Something polished.
Something diplomatic.
But this time I said, "I'm still building that feeling. But I'm not pretending anymore." And that sentence felt more fluent than any idiom I had ever memorized. Because fluency isn't just about language mechanics. It's about congruence. When your internal world matches your external expression, confidence stabilizes.
That is the real transformation.
Learning English through dating in America forced me to confront three things.
Erster, my fear of being misunderstood.
2. My habit of self-editing to be accepted. 3. My belief that perfection earns love. All three were illusions. Misunderstandings happen in every language. Self-editing creates distance, not safety. Perfection is impressive, but intimacy prefers honesty. As my English improved, something unexpected happened. My native language identity became stronger too. Instead of abandoning my cultural communication style, I began integrating it. I explained differences instead of hiding them. In my culture, we don't usually say that directly. That sentence opened conversations instead of closing them. American dating in 2026 is diverse. Intercultural relationships are common. Curiosity often replaces judgment, if you allow space for dialogue. The final layer of growth was internal permission. Permission to speak imperfectly. Permission to need clarification. Permission to disagree without over-apologizing. Permission to exist in between cultures without choosing one over the other. There's a moment every language learner experiences. You stop translating in your head. You stop rehearsing before speaking. You respond in real time, not because your English is flawless, but because your identity feels stable. That's where I am now. Do I still make mistakes? Yes. Do I sometimes search for words? Of course. But I no longer measure my worth through fluency speed. Instead, I measure growth through emotional steadiness. If you're watching this because you're trying to improve your English, build confidence in American dating culture, or simply feel less alone navigating relationships in a second language, here's what I want you to remember. Language learning is not just cognitive. It's emotional exposure. Every vulnerable conversation expands both your vocabulary and your resilience. Every awkward pause strengthens your tolerance for discomfort. Every honest sentence, however imperfect, builds identity integration. You are not behind. You are becoming. And the most powerful version of you will not be the one who sounds the most American. It will be the one who sounds the most authentic. Because at the end of this journey, English is no longer something you're trying to master. It's something you're using to express who you already are. And that's fluency no accent can measure. If this series helped you navigate confidence, English learning, and American dating culture in 2026, stay connected. Your growth doesn't stop here. It just gets more honest. What happens after you stop trying to impress? There's a phase no one talks about when you're learning English in the United States while navigating American dating culture. It's the quiet phase. Not the dramatic beginning. Not the emotional breakthroughs. Not the big vulnerable confessions. But the subtle shift that happens after you stop trying to impress. If you've ever dated in a second language, you know the early stage feels like a performance. You think about your grammar before your feelings. You rehearse texts. You double-check tone. You analyze every LOL and every period at the end of a sentence. Especially in 2026, where communication is hyperdigital, voice notes, FaceTime, long paragraphs about boundaries. Language feels like currency. You want to sound attractive, intelligent, emotionally mature. But eventually, something changes. You get tired. Not of the person. Of the performance. That's when growth becomes real. For me, it happened on an ordinary Tuesday. No dramatic argument.
No romantic climax. Just a simple moment.
He asked, "How was your day?" And instead of crafting a smooth, concise, impressive answer, I said, "Honestly, I felt overwhelmed and a little insecure. And I don't fully know why yet." No polishing. No filtering.
No strategic phrasing. And nothing bad happened.
That was new. Because in the beginning, I believed my English had to compensate for my foreignness. I thought fluency would equal belonging. If I could just speak well enough, I would deserve space in American dating culture. But belonging doesn't come from flawless pronunciation. It comes from consistency. Here's something most language learners don't realize. When you're constantly trying to impress, your nervous system stays slightly activated. You're monitoring yourself, evaluating, editing. That subtle tension blocks natural expression. The moment you relax, even slightly, your tone softens. Your sentences become simpler. And ironically, more powerful. In 2026, authenticity isn't just a buzzword in American dating, it's a filtering mechanism. People are increasingly sensitive to emotional alignment. Over-polished communication can feel distant. Clarity beats charisma. I started noticing patterns. When I spoke slowly, without trying to sound perfect, conversations lasted longer. When I admitted confusion instead of pretending to understand, trust deepened. One night during a disagreement, I said, "I'm not arguing to win. I'm trying to understand us." That sentence wasn't grammatically complex, but it carried weight, because it was grounded. And grounding is attractive. There's a subtle difference between confidence and control. In the beginning of this journey, I wanted control. Control over how I sounded. Control over how I was perceived. Control over outcomes. But control is exhausting. Confidence is different. Confidence is staying steady even when you don't control the outcome. That's the phase I'm in now. I don't need to dominate conversations linguistically. I don't need to respond instantly to prove intelligence. I don't need to hide my pauses. If I don't understand something, I say, "Can you explain that another way?" If I need time, I say, "I want to respond thoughtfully. Give me a moment." These are small sentences, but they changed everything, because they signal self-respect. And in American dating culture in 2026, self-awareness and self-regulation are highly valued. People talk openly about emotional safety. They prioritize communication styles that feel secure. Secure doesn't mean perfect. It means predictable in a healthy way. When you stop trying to impress, your communication becomes more stable, less reactive, less defensive. That stability builds attraction in a way flashy fluency never could. There was a moment recently when he joked, "You're different from when we first met." I asked, "Better or worse?" He smiled. "More you." That's it. That's the evolution. In the beginning, my English self felt like a slightly edited version of me. Softer edges. Fewer risks. More caution. Now, my English voice carries my real opinions. My real humor. My real boundaries. And here's the most surprising part. My accent hasn't disappeared. My phrasing is sometimes unconventional, but my presence feels stronger. Because I'm no longer splitting my energy between being authentic and being acceptable. If you're learning English while dating in the US, you might still be in the impress stage. That's okay. It's natural. Especially when you're adapting to new cultural norms, texting styles, emotional expectations. But eventually ask yourself, am I expressing or performing? Because performance creates admiration. Expression creates connection. And connection is what sustains relationships long-term. The final layer of fluency isn't about mastering idioms or slang. It's about emotional steadiness. When you can sit in a conversation without rehearsing your next sentence. When you can disagree without panic. When you can say, I don't know without shame. That's integration. Language becomes a tool, not a test. Love becomes a space for growth, not evaluation. And you become someone who communicates from identity, not insecurity. If this series has followed you through awkward first dates, vulnerable confessions, cultural misunderstandings, nervous system regulation, and identity integration, here's the final truth of this chapter. You were never behind.
You were unfolding.
Fluency in American English is measurable. Fluency in yourself is transformational. And once you stop trying to impress, you start becoming unforgettable. Not because you sound perfect, but because you sound real. That's where confidence lives. Not in flawless grammar. In fearless honesty. The day you realize you belong. There's a moment that doesn't arrive with fireworks.
No dramatic music. No cinematic kiss. No perfect English monologue.
It's quieter than that.
It's the day you realize you belong.
If you've been learning English in the United States while navigating American dating culture in 2026, you know this journey was never just about vocabulary. It was about visibility. About identity. About figuring out whether you could fully exist in a language that once felt borrowed. And at some point, almost without noticing, you stop feeling borrowed. You start feeling rooted. For me, it happened during something completely ordinary. We were at dinner with his friends.
Fast conversations.
Cultural references. Jokes layered with sarcasm. The kind of environment that, months ago, would have drained me. Early in my journey, group settings were the hardest. In one-on-one conversations, I could pace myself. But in groups, the speed felt overwhelming. By the time I translated internally, the topic had already changed. That gap used to make me shrink. But that night was different. I didn't understand every joke instantly. I didn't catch every reference. But I didn't panic either. When I missed something, I asked. When I had something to say, I said it. When I needed a second, I took it. And I laughed. Naturally. Not performatively. That's when I realized. I wasn't trying to keep up anymore. I was participating. In 2026, American dating culture is fast-paced, emotionally aware, digitally layered. Conversations move from text threads to voice notes to in-person vulnerability quickly. Social dynamics can feel intense, especially for someone operating in a second language. But here's what changes at the final stage of growth. You stop seeing yourself as the foreign one trying to adapt. You start seeing yourself as the person adding something unique. That shift is everything. Earlier in this series, I believed I had to minimize differences, soften my accent, simplify my cultural references, avoid complex opinions in case I couldn't defend them perfectly in English. But now, if I reference something from my home country and someone doesn't understand, I explain it with confidence. If I phrase something differently than a native speaker would, I don't rush to correct myself. Because fluency is no longer about imitation. It's about ownership. There's also a subtle emotional evolution that happens at this stage. At the beginning of this journey, misunderstandings felt like threats. If someone misinterpreted my tone, I assumed it was my fault. If a text message landed awkwardly, I replayed it in my head for hours. Now, I assume goodwill first. If something feels unclear, I ask, did you mean that the way I'm interpreting it? Simple, direct, calm. And calm communication is powerful in American dating culture in 2026. Emotional intelligence is attractive. Regulation is attractive. Clarity is attractive. But here's the deeper truth. You cannot communicate calmly if you are still questioning your right to be there. Belonging is internal before it's external. The final transformation in learning English while dating in the US isn't about perfect grammar or native-level slang. It's about no longer apologizing for existing in the space. I used to overuse sorry. Sorry, my English isn't perfect. Sorry if that sounds weird. Sorry, I'm still learning. Now, I say, let me rephrase that. Notice the difference. One positions you as inadequate. The other positions you as adjusting. That subtle language shift reflects an identity shift. And identity is the real milestone. There was a recent moment that made everything clear. He said, "You don't seem nervous anymore." I paused. Because he was right. The anxiety that used to sit quietly in my chest before emotional conversations, it's mostly gone. Not because I never make mistakes, but because mistakes no longer define me. When you stop tying your worth to linguistic precision, you relax. When you relax, your communication becomes more natural. When your communication becomes natural, connection deepens. And when connection deepens, you realize something powerful. You were never as behind as you thought. Learning English through relationships accelerates growth because it forces exposure. You can't hide behind textbook exercises when someone is asking how you feel. You can't memorize your way through vulnerability. You either show up imperfectly, or you disconnect. Choosing to show up, again and again, rewires your confidence. That's why this journey was never just about dating. It was about integration. You integrated 2 languages, 2 cultural frameworks, 2 versions of yourself. And instead of choosing one, you blended them. That blend is your strength. If you're still in the earlier stages, still nervous before difficult conversations, still overthinking text messages, still replaying awkward moments, hear this clearly. Growth feels unstable before it feels natural. You are not awkward. You are expanding. One day soon, you'll be mid-conversation and realize you haven't translated anything in your head. You'll express an opinion without rehearsing it. You'll disagree without fear of losing connection. And it won't feel dramatic. It will feel normal.
That is the day you belong.
Not because America validated you. Not because your partner approved of you. But because you approved of yourself, in English. And that is the most advanced level of fluency you can reach. You're not just speaking the language anymore.
You reliving in it.
Confidently. If you made it to this moment, I want you to pause for a second. Because this series was never just about learning English in the United States. It was about becoming someone braver. When we started, it looked like a language journey. Vocabulary. Confidence. American dating culture in 2026.
Communication skills.
Emotional fluency. But underneath all of that, it was identity work. You didn't just improve your English speaking skills. You confronted fear. You regulated your nervous system. You stopped performing. You started expressing. You chose vulnerability over perfection. And that changes more than your dating life. It changes how you show up in job interviews, in friendships, in public speaking, in moments where your voice shakes but you speak anyway. Here's the truth most people won't tell you about building confidence in American dating culture. It's not about becoming more American. It's about becoming more integrated, more grounded, more yourself, in English. If you've ever felt behind as an ESL learner in the U.S., if you've ever felt invisible in group conversations, if you've ever replayed a text message 20 times before hitting send, if you've ever wondered whether your accent makes you less attractive, you now know the answer. It doesn't. What makes you magnetic is emotional steadiness. What makes you unforgettable is clarity. What makes you powerful is authenticity. In 2026, communication skills are currency. Emotional intelligence is attractive. Cultural awareness is strength. And bilingual identity? That's an advantage, not a weakness. But here's where it gets interesting. This story isn't finished. Because the next stage isn't about dating. It's about leadership. It's about influence. It's about what happens when you stop trying to belong and start creating space for others to belong to. What happens when you become the calm one in the room? What happens when you're no longer the insecure learner, but the grounded communicator? What happens when someone else looks at you and thinks, if they can do this in a second language, maybe I can too. That's the next chapter. And if you felt seen in this series, if this helped you build confidence in English, navigate American dating culture, improve your communication skills, or simply feel less alone, then this channel is for you. Because we're not just talking about language. We're talking about identity transformation in real life. We're talking about emotional fluency. We're talking about becoming globally confident, without losing who you are. So here's what I want you to do. Subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications. Because the next videos are going deeper into advanced communication psychology, attraction dynamics in modern American dating, confidence building for ESL professionals, and real-world strategies for mastering English through authentic connection. Drop a comment below and tell me, which part of this journey felt the most personal for you? Was it fear? Vulnerability? Confidence? Belonging? I read every comment. And your story might inspire the next video. If this series helped you, share it with someone who's learning English in the US and struggling silently. Someone who thinks they're behind. Someone who needs to hear that fluency is not perfection, it's integration. Because this isn't the end. It's the moment you stop translating and start leading. And in the next episode, we're going to explore something even more powerful. How attraction changes when you stop seeking validation and start embodying value. You re closer than you think. Stay with me.